This video is brought to you by
Auckland Photographer's Clothing.
In this lesson we talk about lenses. Everything you need to know about lenses. I have here different lenses with me and I will explain you what those different numbers on the lenses mean and maybe what lenses are useful for you and maybe what lenses are not that useful for you now. Okay, so let's get started. We have this lens here, which is a lot bigger than this lens here. But what is the actual difference between those two lenses? This lens here is a tele lens, a zoom tele lens. Zoom lens means I can change my focal length. So now I have 70 millimeter and I can change it to 200 millimeter. It's not that important that you understand how focal length physically works or what it physically does, but it's important that you understand what the numbers mean and how they look. This is important for photography. Let's say I have here 200 millimeters. 200 millimeters is a longer lens in simple terms, and it means I can bring something far away, close to the camera. Like an animal, far away, I can make it appear big on my camera sensor. Let's see the face. So when I want to see the face of the animal 50 meters away maybe, I need a 300 millimeter lens. And when I want to see the eye, I need a 500 millimeter lens. So the closer I want to get, the longer my focal length must be. And in simple terms, you can say the bigger the number in millimeters the focal length is, the closer something gets. And as well, the further away you can photograph something. And the opposite way around, the lower the millimeter number is, let's say 16 millimeters, 10 millimeters, the more wide-angled your view is and the more you can have on your image. So it's not that focused anymore on just something far away, a very narrowed field. It's more wide. That's why we call it wide-angle lenses. For example, here on this camera I have now a wide-angle lens, 16 millimeters, and this is a tele lens, 200 millimeters. Both here are zoom lenses, which means I can change my focal length, 70 to 200 with this lens, and with that lens 16 to 50 millimeter. 16 wide angle, 50 a bit narrow, 300 something in the distance, very much compressed and closer to the lens. Then we have on the lens something else, and it's here. I just now read what is written on this lens: FE 470 200 G OSS. So many different numbers and letters. All right, FE stands for the mount. The mount is this thing here on the back of your lens. When you have a Sony camera, you have usually an E-mount lens. E-mount is the mount, the size and how it's shaped to fit on a Sony camera. When you have another camera brand like a Nikon camera, a modern one, you have a Z mount. When you have a modern Canon camera, you have an R mount or RF mount. When you have an older Canon camera, you have an EF mount. A little complicated, but you just have to know what your camera has and what the lens that is on your camera has as a mount. So this is one thing you can look now when you watch the course. Just grab your lens and look what is written there. Is there maybe EF? Is there R? Is there Z? Is there something else written as a mount? Because when you want to buy a new lens for your camera, you have to take care of the mount. There are adapters out there where you can adapt one lens to another camera mount that it fits to your camera. I did it, for example, when I switched from Canon to Sony. I then had my Canon lenses still in use in the first years and used an adapter. Even today, I use an old Canon 300mm lens because it's a beautiful lens, it has a beautiful look, with an adapter for my Sony camera. There are some disadvantages, maybe the autofocus is not that super fast, but in general it should work. Cheaper adapters sometimes don't transmit the aperture. More expensive adapters transmit everything nowadays. Then next we have the 4. With this lens, the 4 means it is the maximum open aperture with this lens. And this is usually something why some lenses are more expensive than other lenses. With cameras, it was the sensor size. With lenses, it's the maximum open aperture. This here is 4. I have other lenses that have 2.8. I have other lenses that have 1.8. The lower that number is, the more open the aperture can be. Remember, aperture, I have a whole lesson about aperture in this course, but aperture meant the hole which the light can go through in your lens. And here, the maximum open it can go is 4, the number 4. And the exact same focal length, 70 to 200, you can buy with a 2.8. And it is almost double the price, because you can have more light that can go through, and that means you can photograph with less light available and capture more light in that situation than with this lens. And it also means that the background and the whole image look is a little bit more blurry and a little bit more beautiful than with this lens. But it's also more heavy because it needs more glass, and a bigger diameter because it needs the 200mm with the 2.8 in combination. I will explain you later what exactly this F means in f2.8, f4 and so on, and then you will understand the whole thing together. Okay, next is G. This is just some branding by Sony. G Master is the professional line, you can say, by Sony. The last thing here is OSS, and this means optical steady shot. Some other brands name it IS, image stabilizer or image stabilization. Doesn't matter how it's called. Important thing is it there, is it not there? Today it's not that important anymore because a lot of camera manufacturers built in the stabilizer in the sensor. So the sensor is stabilized itself, 5-axis stabilization, crazy technical stuff. But in the older days, we had to have the stabilizer in the lens itself, and especially with longer lenses it was important, and also it was more expensive to have a stabilizer than to not have a stabilizer. Why is it good? It helps you to have a steady shot when there's less light. So when you have a certain shutter speed, I will talk about shutter speed later as well, then you will shake your image when it's not fast enough, and then your image stabilizer helps you with this. So this lens, FE mount, f4 maximum open aperture, 70 to 200mm is the focal length, is the zoom lens, G is the branding, OSS is the stabilizer, and here I have even 2 stabilizer modes. One is for every axis and one is only for tilting, and then I can even choose between where it focuses. This is also a difference in price with many lenses. Some lenses are available with autofocus, most of them, and some are not available with autofocus, usually cheaper lenses. In the beginning, it's cool to test around with manual focus, and also with filming, a lot of times you can use manual focus lenses. The more advanced cameras get over time, the more easier it is to film as well with autofocus. But like 6 years ago, we did film everything with manual focus when we did videos, because it was much better when we used the manual focus, and then we could use lenses that were a little bit cheaper but had a max open aperture of f1.4 maybe, but no autofocus, but were cheaper than the same lens with the same specs but with an autofocus motor. So usually it's then named MF for manual focus only, and AF for autofocus lenses. For example, I have lenses from Samyang in the USA. They are called Rokinon, I think, and they have, for example, here AF 75. This means this is the 75mm AF lens. They have a similar lens with MF only, and then 1.8 maximum open aperture, FE for Sony E-mount. So this lens fits here and has an autofocus. So whenever you browse through the web, you know, okay, I look for a manual lens or an autofocus lens. Does it have to have a stabilizer? I would say today no, you don't need any stabilizers anymore, or it's not that super necessary if you have it built in your camera sensor, and the mount of course. With tele lenses you usually have this thing here attached.
Before we continue with this lesson, let's take a quick look at the sponsor of today's video, who's making this lesson available to you for free.
This is a great jacket system for outdoor photography. I'm Albert Ross, professional landscape photographer, and this is my Hawkland Parker Pro jacket. This red color is my personal signature edition. It has multiple layers, not just this layer. It has a fleece layer, a mid layer, and this outer layer. It's very waterproof, it's windproof, and it's suitable for any kind of weather conditions. Anyone can wear it, but it's a jacket system aimed at photographers, meaning it has some very nice features like this little pocket with my lens cloth attached here. I can quickly take it out for my glasses or my lens or my filters. Then it has really big pockets here for accessories, and it has a lot of nice pockets inside for batteries, smartphone, SD cards. It's very convenient for me as a photographer to use, not only because of the weather, but also because of all these nice features.
Maybe you also like the photography backpack, winter gloves, or classic jacket system. At www.hawkland.us.
Hawkland. Photographer's clothing.
With tele lenses you usually have this thing here attached, which is super helpful because the lens is heavy and long, and then when you use a tripod you mount the tripod here. So more in the middle of the lens and not on the camera, that it might break off your mount when it's too heavy. So this is super useful, but usually only with longer lenses. This is the lens hood, and it's super helpful when you have sun coming from above. Then you can have a more contrasty image and you don't have leaking light from the side. So you can use it, but you don't have to use it. You can also get the nice leaking light. Some people prefer to have it because they say it looks more natural, it's more beautiful, and so on. So you can decide what you want. You can also have it on as a protection. I sometimes use it as a protection because when you hit that thing, it doesn't matter. But when you hit your lens, it gets expensive. So you can have it on or don't have it on. What I try to avoid is to have it like this when I photograph. Because when you photograph like this, you see people are usually not that experienced because you cannot focus anymore. Because the focus is here. And here's the zoom. So when you don't use it, just put it somewhere and don't put it the wrong way around on your lens all the time. Okay, then we have some other stuff on the lenses, and this is here in the front. Here, for example, it gives me that circle with a line through it, and it says 72. And this means 72 millimeters is the diameter of the lens. Why is this important? When you use filters, so when you want to use a polarizer, ND filter, graduated filter, whatever, you can screw that on here, and you need the right adapter ring or the right ND filter in size to make it fit here. So this number here is not the focal length, but is the diameter here in the front, and you will need to get the right filter in that size or the right adapter ring in that size when you want to buy, for example, my filters. Then another thing that is usually written on lenses is the minimum focus distance. And here on this lens, it's 0.69 meters or 2.26 feet. This means when you are closer than this distance to your lens and you try to focus, it will not work. You need a certain distance with longer lenses to focus, especially with those tele lenses. With wide angle lenses usually it's not, and with macro lenses it's not, but with tele lenses it's almost always a longer distance. Here, for example, with this lens, it's standing on the front, no, it's standing here on the bottom, 0.5 meters or 1.64 feet, minimum distance. So when you're at 30 centimeters away, you cannot focus. It will be not in focus. As mentioned, this is a zoom lens, and there is something else except of a zoom lens, which is a fixed lens. And this is, for example, this lens here. It is only 75 millimeters. no zoom, you can only use your foot zoom, I always say. And I personally prefer those lenses for most of the time, because usually you get those lenses with a lot more open aperture. Here, for example, f1.8, 70 to 200 millimeters 1.8, I think is not available, or if it's very expensive or not for full frame. And this is usually the downside with zoom lenses. They can build it up to 2.8. There is even a 1.8, but I think it's only for APS-C cameras and not that exact focal length, but a little different. And then with zoom lenses, which are a little bit cheaper, the problem usually is that the minimum open aperture is variable. So for example, with this cheap kit lens, 16 millimeters, I can go up to 3.5 maximum open aperture, and at 50 millimeters I can only go up to 5.6. So I'm very limited in light when I zoom in here with this cheap lens. This is why some lenses are more expensive than other cheaper lenses. And usually the zoom lenses have a lack of just open aperture possibilities built in. But then again, zoom lenses are good because they give you a little bit of flexibility. So you have always to take that in consideration. What do you need? What do you want? Do you need that flexibility, or do you need that extra open aperture and also the look that comes with the open aperture? In general, you can say more expensive lenses are worth the price almost always if you have the budget available and if you just really want to get into photography. Cheaper lenses sometimes also have the disadvantage, beside the stuff I already talked about, that they have strong chromatic aberrations. Not all of them, but the cheaper they get, the stronger it gets. Those are some purple, greenish, sometimes yellow, sometimes even blue lines next to contrast parts of the image. For example, when something black hits something white, then you have those lines. Like when you have a mountain in the distance, then you have some purple lines, some magenta lines, some blue lines around that mountain when you zoom in. Some people accept it, they say I don't care. Some people don't like it. Then there is focus breathing. With more modern lenses, it's not that much of a deal. It means when you focus something close and you focus something in the distance, then the image shifts in some kind of way, and this is bad for focus stacking when you want to do it, but for portrait photography, for example, or when you just do single shots, not that important. And then you as well sometimes can buy manual apertures, so the aperture is not automatic, variable through your camera or settable through your camera, but you have to turn it then manual on your lens. It's also not that big of a deal, and especially with filming you can save a lot of bucks when you just buy manual lenses, both manual focus and manual aperture. In general, more comfort is more expensive. Alright, we could almost call it a wrap if there were not the different sensor sizes we already talked about in the camera lesson. Each sensor size needs different focal lengths to make the same image on the camera. This is super complicated, and I try to explain it as simple as possible. I already talked about crop factor, full frame to APS-C, and then there's also micro four thirds. And I will give you now some examples of how to compensate that focal length, because you can calculate what focal length you need with the sensor size you have and the look you want to achieve. Let's take an 11mm lens and put it now on a full frame camera. Imagine this image you see now is 11mm lens on a full frame camera. It's 11mm. So you see the 11mm now here in the image. And now I turn off that lens and change the camera, full frame camera, to an APS-C camera. Now 11mm APS-C camera, still 11mm, but I'm cropped in. And the factor I'm cropped in is 1.6. So you always have to multiply by 1.6. So 11mm by 1.6. 17.6mm would be now the lens if I would just screw it on a full frame camera to achieve the same look here. APS-C 11mm, you achieve that look. When I would now change it to a micro four thirds camera, same 11mm, I would be cropped in even more, so a bit more narrowed. And the lens I would use to achieve the same look with a full frame camera is now 22 millimeters. The crop factor is 2.0 with micro four thirds. So 11 by 2.0 is 22 millimeters. So I'm cropped in a lot with micro four thirds. I'm cropped in a little lot with APS-C, and I'm not cropped in at 11 millimeters with the full frame camera. And whenever you buy a lens, it's always the full frame you read. Of course, you can calculate the other way around. With micro four thirds, it's pretty easy because it's factor 2. With APS-C, it's a little bit more difficult, 1.6. Let's do it with MFT. 11 millimeters divided by 2 is 5.5. So you need 5.5 millimeters with an MFT camera to achieve the same look like with 11 millimeters at the same distance on a full frame camera. Or you go further away, then you have also the same look, but only in the angle, not in the depth of field, because if this would be 11 millimeters 1.8, now the distance makes the depth of field and the blurriness background and so on, but when you go further away, it's not that blurry anymore because you are further away. But that's a whole other topic, and I don't want you to be confused any more than you are already. So the whole crop factor thing is super confusing, but that's what it is. And also important, APS-C lenses you cannot put on full frame cameras. You can sometimes actually put it on, but you see the inside then of the lens because they are manufactured in a way that the APS-C sensor that is much smaller can see through it, and when you now would put a bigger sensor behind it, then you see actually not only through the lens but also the back of the lens because it's much bigger. So remember, APS-C lenses on full frame cameras, no, but full frame cameras on APS-C cameras, yes, because the full frame camera, you can also see it here, it's that big on the back, and when I now take an APS-C lens, you will be amazed how small it is. APS-C full frame, crazy. And that's why APS-C lenses are cheaper as well than full frame lenses, because much more glass and yeah, just in general bigger. But again, you have to decide what you want, what you need, what camera you have. So your exercise for today is to check your lenses you have, check your camera. Do you have E-mount? Do you have Z-mount? Do you have RF mount or whatever mount? Do you have APS-C? Do you have full frame? Do you have micro four thirds? And what lenses do you have? Do you have prime lenses like fixed lenses? Do you have zoom lenses? What is your maximum open aperture you can use? And all of this will be super useful for this course. So I'm looking forward for the next lessons, because in the next lessons we start with actual photography.
Did you like this free lesson from my course? Then please click thumbs up and write me in the comments what lens you are using. The complete 4-hour Simply Learn Photography course is available on my website www.learnfromben.com. There you can download the full course immediately, watch it at your own pace, and start bringing your photography on a new level. Or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, because over the next 2 years there will be a free lesson from the course every month on this channel with sponsored advertisements. So everyone can access my photography knowledge long term, regardless of their budget, and learn the coolest hobby in the world. So subscribe now to the channel. Every Saturday at 9 AM you can watch a new video about photography, and if you want the full course now, go to learnfromben.com and download the complete 4-hour XXL course and many other courses immediately. My name is Benjamin Jaworskyj. Thank you for watching, and I wish you some amazing photos.